So yes, without further ado, we will jump into the next session, which is the one and only Julia Walsh. We will be looking at what do patients actually ask Dr. Google, and how can we harness these search queries to create content that is actually informative and giving these patients and doctors what they are looking for when they search questions that they might not ask, their doctors face to face. Great. Hello, welcome. Hello, ladies. Can you speak?
It says the host has stopped my video.
Likewise.
I'm just setting you up one moment.
Beautiful.
Okay, I think it should work now.
Okay, I'll start video. There we go.
Okay, there
Hello
we are.
from Australia.
Hello.
Event, really. And Christine, are you also based in Australia?
Yes, definitely. Sydney morning here. I know
Amazing.
it's getting late for you guys.
Amazing.
We're just up with our coffees.
Sounds fantastic. Well, look, I will let you guys get on with it. Enjoy yourselves, and I'm sure our audience will really love hearing what you have to share.
Thank you, Julia. Bye.
Terrific. Thank you. Okay, well, hello to everyone and welcome to Julia Walsh, the CEO of Brand Medicine International, who is a search listening expert. She's also the author of a newly released book called What We Really Ask Dr. Google. How is that for a title? Welcome, Julia. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Christine. And I feel very privileged to be joined today by Christine. She's the editor of Pharma in Focus, which is Australia's most trusted pharmaceutical publication. And I know that we're anticipating our health minister might be resigning today, potentially. So if she has to dash, I guess I'll just have to answer her pre-recorded questions while she jumps to a breaking news story. Yeah, so thank you very much for joining me on this with the HITLAB team.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Julia. And yes, thank you for that very kind introduction. And yeah, I am sort of on tenterhooks. It is a big day here in Parliament in Australia, but hopefully he'll hold off for the next half hour and we can get on with our interview. So Julia, look, I think most of us would be pretty mortified to admit that we turn to Dr. Google as a legitimate source of health information. But I guess the truth is we are all guilty of it. And what's interesting is that it's not just patients, doctors and other healthcare professionals are turning to Google too. Can you talk to us through how they use Google, and is it different to the way that patients use it?
Yeah, thank you so much, Christine. I mean, one of the things we just talked about in that previous session was the democratization of healthcare through digital tools, and search engines are actually like the original digital tool that has democratized healthcare. So what I've undertaken over the last 18 months is to study aggregated search queries that are related to people's health concerns. And so one of the things about that that's really fascinating for people who work in the healthcare industry is that there's an estimated 1 billion questions asked into search engines every single day. And so this represents an untapped resource in terms of capturing healthcare insights. And quite often the way that people ask questions is not the way that we think they ask questions. So while we invest in fantastic tools for disease education and information about prescription medications, what's happening is that if the patients are asking it in a different way, it's not linking through our SEO strategy and it's not turning up in the SERP in response to that or search engine results page. So to your question about doctors Googling too, is that over time, as I started to analyze these questions, at first I was like, well, how do you know who's asking this question? But the more time I spent with the long form questions that were aggregated, I could actually see in the way that the questions were asked what is probably a patient and what is probably a doctor. So for example, if you look at a product like Prolia, which has a black box warning around a rebound effect if you stop taking it or you don't comply with your regular 6-monthly injections. So a patient might ask, can you still break a bone after taking Prolia? Whereas a doctor would ask, denosumab rebound effect. There's no way a patient is going to be asking that second question. And when I first started working with clients on my search listening reports to actually step through the looking glass, and it's as if we're sitting beside that stakeholder while they undertake that consultation with Google and they exchange those questions for health advice. The people at first were quite skeptical that doctors are actually turning to the internet. But I can actually assure people that they are. And it's really important that we understand what they're asking, because the information that comes back to those questions really drives the narrative in the category and has a direct impact on the overall healthcare ecosystem in the real world.
Well, why wouldn't they? I mean, Google is so convenient and it offers, particularly for patients, privacy, and you know, it is a salve to those up at 3 a.m. worry sessions and you just hit your computer.
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head. It's the fact that it's private and it doesn't judge and it's at your fingertips 24/7. It has become, whether we like it or not, it's become that a digital member of the multidisciplinary team in every healthcare scenario. So patients are turning to the internet and asking questions right from when they get that first symptom through to when they're diagnosed and they want to understand the disease and they want to reclaim some control over a situation where they feel like everything's spinning out of control and they're really fearful, through to when they're given a medication. From a study I did last year, 80% of people accept that or admit that they look up a medication when they take it. So if you're working in the pharmaceutical industry on prescription products, have you actually looked through that patient lens and seen how that information turns up for them? For example, in Bing, along the top of the bar there, it starts with warnings and then goes to like contraindications, and then, you know, it goes through all of these different things before it gets to indications. And indications is not even patient language. So if we're creating a CMI or consumer medical information leaflet, we write what it's for or how, you know, what it's used for. So when people look it up online, it's not necessarily jumping out at them what it's used for, and they're gravitating towards this negative stuff that might only happen in 0.1% of patients. So it's actually driving primary non-adherence as well.
So maybe we should deep dive into that a little bit. You know, Google can be a fantastic resource. If you want to order Thai for dinner tonight, you hop onto Google, you've got the phone number of your local restaurant, you know their opening hours, you've got the access to their menu, and you know whether they're going to deliver to your place, the whole thing. So it is very efficient in some settings. So what is so wrong? What is going so wrong when people are trying to access credible information from Google about their health?
Yeah, I think it's there's a couple of things. There's the digital disconnect that's happening between what we think patients want to know and what they really want to know. And there's another disconnect between what words we think they use versus the words they really use. So for example, Champix was recalled off the market recently in Australia, and I tracked the changed terms from before to after that event. And, you know, you might think, oh, put up a press release and we'll say Champix recall, and anyone will just Google Champix recall and they'll get the information that they need. But people started Googling Champix horror stories. Like, that's completely different language. And so that returns completely different content. So something that's gone like just a logistical aspect of a recall situation to stuff being found on the internet that might have otherwise been buried very deep. So if you're not listening to the real questions that people are asking, you're not understanding that patient information experience. And I think that's where, you know, from ordering Thai is a really simple thing, but in the healthcare industry, we've got a big job to do. I find it quite exciting because I feel like there's so much low-hanging fruit that even if we just started somewhere, we could really improve things for patients. And the ultimate goal of that is to accelerate the pathway to diagnosis. rather than having people sitting on a symptom for a really long time because their optimism bias is kicking in, and they're in that first stage of grief, which is denial. And so they're looking up a symptom, and it could be indicative of breast cancer or something really serious or multiple sclerosis. But because they're in this mindset, they're actually gravitating towards information that gives them permission to just dismiss their concerns and not go and see their doctor and not go and get a test. So even if we could do a better job of that,
Yeah, because, you know, being diagnosed with something or even suspecting that you may have any illness, let alone a serious illness, is quite confronting and quite emotional. How does this flavour the way people access information? Does this change what they're actually typing into their search engine?
100%. It really does. Like, their emotions come through in the questions. And actually, someone said to me the other day, you know, when I was, they were asking me about the book, and they were like, oh, what, we really asked Dr. Google? That must be so funny, like seeing everyone's, you know, private questions about random symptoms. And it actually stopped me in my tracks, because I thought, oh, I guess you could see that it might be, but for me, it's not funny at all. Like, it's a really serious thing. And quite often I get goosebumps when I see the kinds of questions that people ask. And I get really disheartened when I see the results that they get in response to those questions. The fear that they have over a diagnosis is often something that they don't share with their doctor, because they don't have time in that consultation. They're just talking about the practical steps that they need to take. And like you said, it's not until the middle of the night, when everything else is done for the day, but they can't sleep because they're just gripped in anxiety over what this diagnosis means. And so quite often they'll say, you know, they're worried that, is it going to kill me? Am I going to die? How long have I got to live? And so you see those stages of grief play out in the types of questions all the way through, from bargaining, where people say, can newly diagnosed diabetes be reversed? Or can my HIV test be wrong? Through to the fear stage, where can I still work with cervical cancer? Or, I mean, can I still have a baby with cervical cancer? Or can I still work with multiple sclerosis? So you see all of those stages play out right through to acceptance, when the patient starts to talk about the disease in terms of my disease. So it'll be my breast cancer or my diabetes. So aggregating questions around that seed term, you get all the long form questions that people are asking. And you know, if you've used my and the disease, all of those questions have been generated by patients. And it gives you just this incredible window into what they really want to know. And then by mapping that patient information experience and actually looking at what the Google search results are that are currently coming back, you can see what they're being influenced by. So for example, with My Cancer, there's this My Cancer Story Rocks blog that pops up in the autosuggest. And for someone who's at that late stage of having a disease where they own it so much they're starting to type in My Cancer, something that sounds so positive and exciting like that, they're like, ooh, I'll click on that. And then Google autosuggest is like, that's what the person was looking for, when in fact it was just they were attracted to it because it sounds really optimistic and positive. And then it calibrates to continue to offer that to anyone who types in My Cancer. Whereas when you go there, it's a person with no health credentials promoting a $7 dog worming tablet to cure cancer. And he is siphoning patients off from clinically tested, properly managed through an oncologist kind of regimens, through to something that they can buy on Amazon. And if the one that he used isn't available, here's the link to buy the generic. And, you know, and these patients are just being trapped in this really, really bad cycle that started with an unintended journey and then ended up, you know, well of misinformation, and who knows what's happening to those patients. But he's got tens of thousands of people in his Facebook group now, almost 30,000 in fact.
Wow, it's frightening,
so that's
isn't it?
the kind of stuff that happens. Yeah.
So there seems to be this enormous gap between what patients want to know and access to credible information that can help them, and what comes up when they put these queries into their search engines. So how can, you know, the industry jump in there and bridge that gap? What can we do?
Yeah, because I've worked in healthcare communication for over 20 years, and I know the effort that goes into creating amazing assets. Like, a lot of thought and consideration and work goes into creating evidence-based content that serves what we understand to be the patient needs or the healthcare provider's needs. And we've invested in the development of that, but the disconnect is that it's not currently turning up when people turn to search engines. And when you think about 1 billion questions a day related to health, then we really need to start doing a better job of turning up there. But how do we do that? And that's what I believe is a necessary evolution of the traditional approach to SEO. And we need to escalate that to SLO, or search listening optimization. And by doing that, we start with the end in mind, and we actually seek to understand what our stakeholders really want to know, how they ask those questions, and we design our content so that it organically turns up in response to that in bite-sized chunks. Because currently, for example, some categories I work in, there might be a wonderful government resource, and it's a PDF document, and it's 26 pages long, and it's got everything you need to know about that particular topic in it. And so every time someone asks a question on that PDF pops up and you click on it. But then if you're on your phone particularly, I mean, it's not user-friendly at all. You're trying to scroll through 26 pages to go, where's the answer to the question specifically that I just asked? So it's about creating bite-sized content that actually reflects back to specific questions rather than just reams of information and plonking it on the internet and hoping that someone will find it. Because from the mapping of the real world information experience, both for patients and for healthcare professionals right now, I can assure you that it's not coming up. And also very rarely does local content turn up. So within a market, whether it's Switzerland or the UK or Australia, those local patient groups are not turning up, and people don't really go past page 1 very often on Google. Like, that's the reality. They'll ask the question a different way rather than go to second and third pages to actually look for information. So being there, whether it's organic or sponsored, is really, really important to having that influence then on the offline healthcare ecosystem through providing a better evidence-based patient information experience.
Seems like a fairly simple fix, really. If we know what patients are asking, we have the information, we just need to tailor it in a way that suits them. What's happening? Why is this not happening?
I think because really until we had the tools to aggregate those real world questions in the long form, we were just relying on what people shared with us in focus groups and designing our content and building our SEO strategy around that. And so now that we have this, and I've developed this methodology over the last 18 months to actually, I call it search listening health, or hashtag search listening health, to sort of track articles and stuff about it. But now that we can see that and we can prove how poor that actual real world information experience is, it's actually the key to improving it. So it's actually quite exciting. We can use these insights to better determine our digital strategy. But the other thing I find really wonderful about them is they inspire tactics for offline use as well. So you can actually create tactics that might go straight to a healthcare provider. It could be a poster that sits on their wall and provides them a reminder about a particular treatment algorithm, or it could be a patient education brochure or better instructions delivered alongside the delivery of the medication. I quite often see people asking questions like how to inject something, and like, how is it possible that they got past the doctor where they were prescribed this medication, past the pharmacy where they were dispensed this medication, they go home and they look it up on Google how to inject it? And this happens for a lot of different injectable medications, and quite often YouTubers who have no health credentials are the ones who are getting all of the views and influencing these patients on how to inject their medication. So I think this is really the key. We can report misinformation when we find it as an industry. We can deprioritize it in the auto-suggest results by giving the feedback. We can create better content that echoes the real world questions and therefore turns up, or we can sponsor content to make sure that for critical questions about a medication, where it's going to influence how they take it, that the right information is turning up as well. So I think it's quite exciting, because I think we can actually use this to unlock huge potential and transform the whole, way we exchange information with people through search engines, and ultimately see a spillover beneficial effect in the real world.
Right. Okay. So this is not a takeover of traditional healthcare delivery. This is a supplement to it, a complement to it.
Yeah, exactly. It's just building on what we already have. There's actually a question here where someone's asking if what you say or ask Google varies by regions, races, socioeconomics, and age. So yes, this is a really good question. It does. And so, for example, there are certain diseases, that's one of the things that I do is I go, okay, this is a younger patient. If they're asking about acne, you know that they're probably a younger patient. If they're asking about how to get pregnant or concerns about pregnancy, you know that that's probably a woman. So there are ways that you can discern different types of people by the questions that they ask as well. For example, if younger people are more used to using voice activated search, then you'll see a more complete sentence in the search, as opposed to older, say like an older male, they might just type with their thumbs like only the words they really need to do. And so then you know that patient is probably an older male or older female like myself. So you can actually start to segment. And I actually have a whole chapter on that in the book as well. Like, how do you segment the queries to understand who's asking?
Yeah. So what's the uptake like from industry? Are they getting on board?
Yeah, it's been really slow initially. I think that people confounded it with social listening, which is a well-established, quite mature industry, but it's search listening. So it is a different discipline. It's coming at it from a different aspect. In a way, we're tackling it from upstream, because what's found in search is often shared in social. And I was working with a team at the WHO ITU who are focused on the infodemic around the COVID pandemic. And they were finding that they're quite often being slammed by stuff popping up in social, and trying to find out how search listening could be used as an early warning system. And it really does work in that sense, because you can see new questions emerging as questions change 5 to 15% every day on any given topic. So you can actually track, it's like a reflection of our collective consciousness on an issue. You can track those changing and emerging questions. So for example, the oxygen crisis in India was something that I was able to track and reflect through the search data as it changed over time. And that was quite compelling to see. So I think now people are understanding the power of this, and that I feel like it's going to have to be the cornerstone of brand strategy moving forward. You need to understand the digital landscape in your category if you really are going to have a robust communication strategy with all your stakeholders.
Okay, we've only got a couple of minutes left, but I think a good thing to finish on is if you could talk to us about how this will transform patient care, because I guess that is the ultimate end goal.
Yeah, I think it transforms patient care in the sense that we finally, rather than telling people to stop Googling stuff, because we're never going to change that behavior, we accept that that's part of the patient journey at every stage. And we as an industry do a better job of providing them locally relevant, true, evidence-based content, as well as, I believe, adding in a layer of empathy to the way we create content online. So for example, recently I saw a patient asking, just basically they confess into search engines, and it was the disease that I was working on, makes me feel suicidal. And it's like, oh, that poor person, you know, and it's a disease that doctors don't necessarily think of as something that's going to make a patient feel like that, because it's kind of cosmetic. But when they asked that, they were being served back all this content about clinical papers on how many patients in that category are more likely to commit suicide. So that's not turning up for patients. That's reinforcing a horrific concern. So I believe as well, we can transform the patient experience by turning up online with content that guides them to the next stage of their patient journey in a supportive and empathetic way.
Yes, and I guess, you know, hopefully it would lead to earlier diagnosis, which of course is going to lead to far better outcomes.
That's the goal. I mean, you know, we live in countries with wonderful healthcare systems, but we've still got people with MS being diagnosed 5 or 10 years after they first started having symptoms, and with stage 4 cancer and things like that. So I believe that if we could turn up and provide a better response to the way that they Google symptoms, like they might Google one symptom at a time, well, let's provide them with a survey or something that gets them to think about the whole prodrome of symptoms that might be related to a condition, and encourage them. Like, it's better to go and get a test now and find out than to ignore it and later on have to deal with a much more difficult to treat issue.
Right, that's fair enough. Well, thank you, Julia. Your insights are terrific, and this really is definitely a space to watch. I think over the next little while, we'll be seeing some really transformative things happen. So it's really terrific, the work that you've done. Thanks for your wonderful insights.
Thanks, Christine, and thanks, HITLAB team, and Julia over there. I don't know what time it is for you at the moment.
11 p.m.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, and there was one other question there as well about non-MDs, but educated people, you know, people who actually ask questions. So there's going to be different levels of health literacy in terms of the way people interact with healthcare content online, definitely.
Well, thank you so much, ladies. And just on a personal note, as someone who is trained in medical science and then worked in marketing for tech companies, this brought together my two worlds, and I was hanging on your every word, Julia. It was really interesting to listen to, and a very cool space to learn about. So thank you very much for coming on. And thank you, Christine, for being a wonderful co-speaker and moderator. It was a lovely conversation.
Oh, wonderful.
So, thank you.
Thank you,
See you
guys.
guys later.
And Julia, what looks like a very sunny day in Australia.
Yes.
Take care and best of luck with the rest of the conference.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
So, all right, fantastic. Moving right along, we next have Akila, who will be sharing some of her research on preventing and managing burnout and stress in healthcare practitioners, something that is very relevant in these pandemic times. So we'll be back in just one moment.